Hello, okay friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. Today, we're going to discuss a very interesting topic, how I like to water my orchids. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids, from what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. I normally like to soak my orchids, and I think there are primarily three reasons. The first reason really is when I soak my orchids, I know that the leaves, the space between the leaves will not easily get water trapped in between, which will help me avoid potential rotting issues. Maybe it's a stem rot, maybe it's crown rot. I know some people do water their orchids from above, but they do have very good ventilation system or have really good airflow. A friend of mine in Taiwan has a greenhouse with really good ventilation system. He basically used a big water hoses. The water is strong, but it's still kind of misty. It's not like a water hose coming out of really strong water pressure. So he basically just used that to water all his orchids, right? So the orchids basically would just get rained on, right? But all his orchids are doing great. But it's not something that everybody can do in our home environment. And the second reason that I like to soak my orchid when I give them water is I get to use less water. Currently, I'm using filtered water. So my filtered water has almost 0 ppm, which is great, right? But the filter costs money, right? So if I soak my orchids, I know I use less water because sometimes, especially if you grow your orchids in bark chips, if you just water your orchids and let the water run through, sometimes you use a lot more water because the water just basically flow through the media freely, and without all the media getting enough water. So you may have to let water run through it for a while, and that to me is using more water than necessary. So when I soak my water, I know I'm using less water. And the third reason is more of a selfish reason. I soak my orchids so I can do something else. And then I come back to them to drain them. And when that happens, when I remember that they're still being soaked in water, usually it's an hour, sometimes 2 hours. But I really think that they will be just fine because I haven't killed any orchid by soaking them in the way that I do. Plus, some orchids, are grown in full water culture and their roots are just fine. And another example is that in orchids' natural environment, for example, in a rainforest, sometimes they get rain for an entire day or maybe multiple days and they are still fine. They're not drowned and they're not having root rot problems. So I think it's not really about the amount of water or how long they sit in water. It has to do with water and the ventilation and the temperature and the humidity. With all of that, as long as it's not too hot, too humid, and too much moisture at the same time, I think any one of these three reasons is missing, the orchid will do just fine. But if your orchid is potted purely in sphagnum moss and if there is no ventilation holes on the side, I would not recommend soaking your orchids. Because if the sphagnum moss is old, it's compacted, or maybe it's just very compacted to begin with, soaking your orchids in water for an extended period of time, it would just get the moss too saturated with too much moisture and without ventilation. I really think that it will cause a lot of big problems. So in general, and I know most orchids are that people purchase from stores or nursery they're all grown in sphagnum moss. So my personal recommendation is, or how I do it is, I always start with a quarter cup of water to start, and then I basically adjust the water amount based on individual orchid's need. For example, if an orchid is already dried in, like 3-4 days after I give them a quarter cup of water, then I know next time I will probably up it to a 1/3 of a cup of water. So you just kind of have to do that back and forth to really find that perfect formula for your environment. Every orchid is different, and every growing environment is different in terms of humidity and temperature, as well as seasons. Now back to this orchid. The media for this particular orchid is bark chips primarily, and I do see some pieces of sphagnum moss mixed in between. So you can consider this is a mixture of sphagnum moss and bark chips, and that's why I use the soaking method, and so far it's been working pretty well. And for these type of media mix, and with the ventilation hose on the side, what I have done usually is I will soak them for, like I said, 1 hour, 2 hours, whenever I remember, and I go back to them. I let them drain very well when I take them out, and then I will literally put them on a saucer and let them sit like that for 1 to 2 days, depending on the temperature and humidity level in my sunroom. The reason why I do that is really to allow additional or excess moisture to evaporate quickly enough before I put it back into its decorative container. So far, this method has worked really well for me, especially with this type of media and this kind of container with ventilation hose on the side. I don't know what kind of method you use. If you're using something very different, it would be awesome if you can share it with the rest of us. Alright, this is all I have for you for today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!